polling. Always very a hot topic, especially now when we're seeing big numbers, especially in favor of Labour at the moment. Labour are about, I think, 22, 24 points ahead in the polls at the moment, I think, depending which ones you look at. But overwhelmingly at the moment, even in that, we have seen polls that show the red tidal wave that would show that the Conservatives would lose all their coastal seats. We have seen polls, especially in and around Cornwall, that could show that the Conservatives could lose their stranglehold on that section of the country. Polls are incredibly important. It tells you, or at least a barometer or a snapshot at that moment, what people are thinking. But I've always said this, I will always maintain this. General elections, you never know what could happen in a general election. You never know what issue may crop up, what comment one person might make that suddenly might spark it off as a general major issue of voting in people's minds. Of course, take, for example, Ed Miliband and the infamous bacon sandwich picture, which did immense damage to Labour's reputation at the polls. The 2017 general election, or the snap general election that Theresa May called, on the assumption that, again, according to polls, she was going to win in an absolute landslide. But of course, she didn't. Why? Because that 2017 general election did not turn out to be about Brexit. It turned out to be about pensioners' heating allowances. Again, general elections have a bizarre way sometimes of throwing off all the intentions of polling sometimes. Sometimes the polling does get it right. Sometimes it can fall within the margin of error. Sometimes it can be off. But more often than not, polls do tend to be at least right in calling a lot of these things and issues. But, of course, as always, sometimes crazy things can happen. But we're going to get into a piece, at least a piece responding to a recent webinar that was held by a grassroots campaign about, again, rejoining certainly the EU. And of course, it was heavily focused at looking at what is going on in these polls that we have seen. What is going on? Because sometimes you've got to dig a little deeper. Just because you have a number, what do these numbers essentially mean? One of the things that it brings up, indeed, is the fact that even though you have a lot of these people who are, or at least we're seeing these lead in the Labour lead at the moment, you've got a lot of people out there who are in the don't know category. And I think historically, and as said when push came to shove, unfortunately they fell in a 2-to-1 way. They went over to the Conservatives. So, as we said before, sometimes polling, you've got to be careful. And this is what we've said, and I've said before on this channel, if Keir Starmer really wants to win in a massive landslide, he's got to be big, he's got to be brave, he's got to be bold. And I hope he really does. I really, really hope he does. Because if he is big, brave, and bold at the next general election, it's absolutely his, campaign to win. And unfortunately, if he plays it safe, if he doesn't really do something, I think, bold and exciting to really, jazz up the electorate to vote for Labour, I think it could unfortunately be his, campaign to lose. But like I say, we'll talk about that probably more when we get to see certainly Labour's manifesto. Like I say, a lot, I think, will come down to it. What is in Labour's manifesto? So let's get diving into this, because there's some interesting parallels that I want to talk about. Certainly about, interestingly enough, Prohibition. But there you go. That we'll go diving into that in a moment. But before we do that, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, do remember to ring the bell as well. And of course, as always, please do remember to check out the links down below, the Patreon page, the Pony Club as well. Like I say, this week we've just done a deep dive into Nigel Farage's piece he wrote for The Telegraph, going over the bizarre claims that he makes, and of course his, I think, strange insistence that he seems to be stepping away from Brexit, which has some very interesting implications indeed. But anyway, like I say, if you are part of the Pony Club or the Patreon, you can go watch that. Or if you want to go sign up to those, you can not only watch that video, but the many other uh, videos that I've made for you on that as well. So, as always, thank you very much to those people who do help and support the channel, even if you do just hit the like and share button. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel. So, let's go cracking onto this, because I think this is absolutely fascinating. This, and I'm sort of upset I didn't get to go to this because I missed out on this, unfortunately. So this is the interesting one that I want to cover first before we get into their 10 points that they looked into. We'll get into the 10 points, but I want to cover, before we do that, the parallels with Prohibition, because I find this a bit fascinating. So Richard Bertel is a professor of clinical psychology who has contributed actively to the Brexit debate through social media and original research. His presentation began in an unusual place, by examining the parallels between Brexit and Prohibition in the USA, which in 1921 was made permanent by an amendment to the US Constitution. Both Brexit and Prohibition involved decades of campaigning by an unlikely pardon me, oh dear, by an unlikely alliance of unrelated parties. In the case of Brexit, libertarians, Lexiteers, nationalists, racists, and ordinary people taken in by the Leave propaganda. They both became prominent to a particular historical juncture where they could exploit public discontent in the aftermath of, respectively, the First World War and the crash of 2008. They both led to the formation of strong identities, being Dries and Wets and Leave and Remain. Both the Dries and the Leavers are both adopting hard and soft positions. And Prohibition happened long before the advent of opinion polling, but post-Brexit polling has confirmed that the Remain and Leave identities formed largely only after the 2016 referendum. And that's something interesting to pick up on as well, that these identities that we have seen form didn't form until after the referendum, not at the referendum, which a lot of people claim they were formed at the referendum, but polling shows it was only after the referendum where those actually became identities and sort of became entrenched. But yeah, just an interesting thing to sort of pick up on that. But anyway, so identities are quick to form and slow to change. In general, the stronger the identity, the harder it is to change. But soft identities weaken and dissipate over time. Prohibition, which was expected to be permanent, was reversed only after 13 years of contact with reality, after losing the support and interest of the soft Dries. Is Brexit on the same trajectory? It could be. And that's interesting, because I think that is something that we should certainly look at. They get into later on in the article, and it's something sort of we've covered before on this channel, that when you actually talk to Leavers, some of them are actually in favor of freedom of movement, which is kind of interesting, given the fact that a lot of people, certainly in the Brexit and the Leave camp, claim that a vote for Leave was predominantly done to end freedom of movement. But you've got a lot of these soft Leavers who are in favor of the single market customs union and are in favor of freedom of movement. It's very interesting information at this, because it shows that not only is Brexit ultimately on a reverse trajectory, but the soft Leavers are very quickly leaving. So as they've said, this identity of Leave, when you look at the hard and the soft Leavers, the soft Leavers are very quickly running away from Brexit. And even now, we've got hard Brexiteers or people who you thought were hard Brexiteers. Just take, for example, the Windsor Framework, where we were expecting at least a significant pushback from the ERG. What we seem to have had was the hard levers are like, no, we have to put some defense up against this, whereas the soft levers are more like, no, actually, we're fine accepting this, which does bring up some very interesting possibilities, as we'll get to the 10 points later on. But next point, just cover this 5-stage model that they went over. So Bernthal presented a 5-stage model of the Prohibition story: denial, recognition there was a problem, and attempts to mitigate the problem, the double bookkeeping, this was holding in mind opposite outcomes simultaneously, and reversal. And just 4 years after parliamentary legislation to give effect to the referendum decision, we are already moving from stage 2 to 3. So we're moving from recognition that there is a problem to attempts to mitigate the problem. So that's interesting that we're moving to this, because Brexit has caused massive problems. And you've got to look now with the fact that you've got Rishi Sunak extolling the virtues of Northern Ireland being in this double market situation, how wonderful it is. And now you've got people going, well, hold on, Rishi, why can that not count for the rest of the UK as well? And I think you will now start to see arguments come from maybe the most surprising sources. It would not surprise me if, give it a year or two, you would see someone who was considered a Brexiteer advocating for the UK to rejoin the single market customs union. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, especially if you take on the fact that they might have been not a hardcore lever, but a soft lever. And as you see, as they made the case for Prohibition, that it was the soft dries that left and that lost the support of the Prohibition movement that allowed Prohibition to be overturned. It's very much a fascinating insight, and it could very well go that way. But like I say, we'll have to see, I suppose, given where we are. So we'll finish this part off, then we'll go to the 10 points. So polling evidence from 2017 onwards has indicated that a hard Brexit has never enjoyed public support. And recent polls show that Brexit is becoming increasingly unpopular, and that mitigations of Brexit damage would be welcomed, and that most people, including those identifying as leavers, would accept freedom of movement and single market membership. Bernstall closed with the thought that one of the biggest impediments to reversing Brexit may be the idea that it can't be reversed. Then, of course, absolutely, it can be reversed. Absolutely. And bear in mind, if you want to go read the rest of this article, because it's absolutely fascinating, some of the insights that they came through. Like I say, it's on the Yorkshire Bylines with the title of Brexit Polling Beyond the Numbers. Very much a fascinating read. But now I want to go to the final, because they had this. And it's 10 points that came from this, and its implications and lessons for campaigners, which I think is very, very interesting. I think very, very much worth jumping into on this. So, true to its aim, the webinar identified important implications for pro-EU campaigners arising from the presentation and summaries of above, with some other issues that also came up in the Q&A. So, first one, number one, campaigners should continue to generate targeted messaging about the harms of Brexit. The message is getting through. So, absolutely on this, we can get through on this. And like I say, we've that's what we've been doing on this channel. Like I say, the numerous other channels of like a pro EU stance that have been constantly talking about this and reaching out to, don't be afraid to reach out to people who you think are Brexiteers, because they may not be as hardcore as you think they are. If they are a soft lever, then they might actually be persuaded for single market membership and freedom of movement. It's kind of interesting when you think about it in those terms of, as was said before in the article, about in terms of about the prohibition, what happened with that. So, number two, the hard Brexit majority are unlikely to change their view, and time and effort should not be wasted trying to persuade them. Exactly. But don't be afraid, because you've got to find out, are they hard Brexiteers or are they soft? If they are the soft Brexiteers, then they can be persuaded, just as they were during Prohibition. It was the soft dryers that actually went, no. After 13 years of what reality has looked like, Prohibition has absolutely failed in its cause and what it intended to do. So ultimately, it was overturned, and it was that loss of those softer Prohibition supporters over to the anti-Prohibition side, persuaded by those arguments, that ended Prohibition. So it's very likely that's the same way we need to work now as well. So number three, the strongest argument against Brexit is its implementation. While we could just stand back and watch Brexit self-destruct, it would be better to be dismantling the counter narratives that present the positive reasons for. It would be better for disseminating counter narratives that present the positive reasons for rejoining the EU, as we do on this channel all the time. So, number four, a narrative that the campaign seeks a, quote, democratic decision to rejoin would neutralize the Brexiteer argument that reversing Brexit would be anti-democratic, as it would be. We've always said it would need, ultimately, I think, another referendum to rejoin the EU. No one disagrees with that. So, number five, for most people, the most important consequence of Brexit is the economic harm it has caused. So, a major focus of the campaign should be to provide a narrative of the economic benefits of a closer relationship between the UK and the EU. Again, no argument for me on that. Absolutely. We just yesterday we talked about the business that had lost what, about 60% of its revenue and its business from the EU sales, and was having to downscale. So absolutely, you'll get no argument from me on that. We talk about that all the time. So number six, a major issue for Leavers was and is the payments from the UK into the EU budget. This issue needs to be neutralized by highlighting the much greater economic benefits of EU membership. Exactly. Even then, that was a mistake that the Leave campaign generally made. Our greatest slogan could have been, for every pound we give the EU, we get 10 back, at 10 pounds back. That should have been a message that should have been widely disseminated and widely focused on, because it was easy for people to understand. For every pound we send to the EU, we get 10 back. That is easy enough for anyone to understand. And that is the type of economic argument we need to sort of simplify it down to, because unfortunately not everyone understands economics, and you cannot stand in the middle of the street and try to explain to someone for 30 minutes the economic advantages for joining the EU. You've got to be quick and snappy about it. You've got to be quick like that. Oh yeah, for every pound we send to the EU, we get 10 back. Bang. That's how quick we have to be. This you cannot spend again, as unfortunately people tried to do during the referendum, spend those 30 minutes trying to explain to your average man in the street, how economically being in the UK benefits the UK. So, number 7. While there is not yet an overwhelming majority to rejoin the EU, there has been a substantial majority of support since 2017 for rejoining the single market, and freedom of movement is not an impediment. So bear this in mind of what we've just seen with the Windsor Framework, and Rishi Sunak extolling the benefits of being members of both markets. You could easily replace his speech that he was giving, strip out Northern Ireland, and just say the UK, because exactly the same thing applies to the UK. So the rejoining movement, I think our now main aim should be not full EU membership yet, but focusing on single market membership. I think that should be where we should aim, then go to sort of fully rejoining. That, I think, would be the main aim, because remember, the Leave campaign expressly said that a vote for Leave was never about leaving the single market. So maybe we could get away with not having a referendum, because after all, that's what people voted for in 2016. Now, Brexiteers will ultimately throw a fit, but hey, you can just throw their words back in their face, because after all, as Daniel Hannan said, only a fool would leave the single market and customs union. And of course, he was pitched as the brain of Brexit. If you've got a question about Brexit, Dan's the man with the answer. So that will be very interesting, but we'll see if that one day happens. Who knows? So 8. It is not well understood that freedom of movement was a freedom to work, not an invitation to welfare tourism. Campaigners should explain that restating freedom of movement would be a win-win. UK citizens could enjoy the benefits of unfettered access to EU countries, and EU workers could come here and support the UK economy. And this was what I think was, again, yet another mistake that was made. I think that should be the one of the calling cards of, oh, freedom of movement just leads to more welfare tourism. No, the answer should have been freedom of movement is an invitation to work, not welfare tourism. That, to be honest, is a fascinating and would have been a very interesting counter to a lot of the stuff about sovereignty. And as I said, sometimes the thing that was lacking in 2016 was we needed very quick, snappy phrases. And unfortunately, that's not what we had, which led to, again, Remain campaigners trying to talk to people in the streets for about 30, 40 minutes plus. And the thing is, the average person in the street doesn't want that. They need to go do their shopping, whatever. They can't afford 30 minutes standing talking to you, talking about economics. So you need sometimes that quick boot, that quick message to be delivered. So number 9, the Labour Party needs to think very carefully about how to calibrate its Brexit policy. That is very true. I ultimately agree with that, which may shift in a pro-EU direction as Labour attempts to profit from political turmoil in a pro-EU Scotland, particularly considering the very high level of support for a much closer relationship with the EU among Labour voters and party members. We're already seeing that with Keir Starmer talking about doing alignment deals with the EU. So that is already on the cards. And of course, the possibility of losing support to the Lib Dems if they were to articulate a more strongly pro-EU position. So again, that is true. Labour finds itself in a very difficult position. We've talked about this before, how difficult it really is for Labour on this, because if Labour were to come out with this oh yeah, we're going to rejoin the single market customs union, etc., etc. Maybe they don't have that 22% lead, you know? And unfortunately, this could open the door to what would be a conservative wipeout, to maybe that becomes a lifeline that maybe saves the Conservative Party if Keir Starmer were to advocate for that. As I've said before, you've got to be, Labour has to be very careful and think very strategically about its Brexit position. Even though we may not like Labour's current Brexit position, as I've said, it makes a lot of sense. I don't like it, but it makes sense politically. So, number 10, removing the hard Brexit supporting Conservative government may not be as easy as the polls suggest. So, a strong tactical voting campaign will be needed come the general election. As I always said, I'm always for tactical voting. But as we've always said, there needs to be that message out and it needs to be spread. I've said before, tactical voting in 2019, the message was not as strong and as loud as it really should have been not only in 2017 but 2019 as well. It needs to be a lot stronger. The message needs to be delivered. Not only that, but parties need to be behind it as well. And if you don't have the parties behind it, then sometimes you need to go, right, abandon tactical voting, just vote Labour. Like it or not, that may be the case. Some of us have to follow. But hey, there you go. That's a discussion, of course, for later. But anyway, yeah, overall, fascinating. I'm sort of sad that I missed it. Maybe if it is recorded somewhere, I would love to see it. But yeah, the example between overturning Brexit and the eventual overturn of Prohibition, that's kind of interesting. I've never really thought about that. But then again, never had that information to hand before. So that could actually prove to be very interesting if it does end up turning that way. So yeah, if we do end up going that way, that would be fascinating if we do. So we will see. We will see if we do end up going in that general direction. But the direction of travel does seem to be going in that way, that the soft Leave support is collapsing. That they are losing support, as you can see in the polls. So maybe we are headed in the direction, same as Prohibition. Could very well be likely. But yeah, those 10 points, agree with them. Absolutely. But again, any sort of rejoin campaign for be it the single market and EU needs to learn the campaigning. You have to have really quick, snappy slogans. And unfortunately, some of these difficult economic, arguments for rejoining the EU, you cannot be having your members standing in the street trying to explain to the average man for maybe like 30, 40 minutes plus the advantages of rejoining. You need to be bang, bang, bang. That's how quickly it needs to be. But of course, that's, conversation when it comes up. But there are some there. Certainly the quick economic advantages, for, I don't know if this would still apply. Obviously, this is sort of the 2016 referendum time, but for every pound we'd send to the EU, we get 10 back. That was something that should have been very heavily pushed by the Remain campaign. The one about freedom of movement, it's freedom of movement, but it's freedom to work, not welfare tourism. That would be a fantastic slogan for any movement for rejoining the single market. Would be fantastic, because as we've seen in the polls, soft leavers, they're actually okay with freedom of movement. After all, it means they get to go to Europe and sail through passport checks and customs controls. And I'll tell you now, the more we get in those big queues, the more those soft leavers are going to be like, well, I want my freedom of movement back. So, yeah, interesting. As we said, sometimes when it comes to these polls, you need to dig beyond the numbers, as the title of the article did imply. You do need to really dig beyond those numbers. But anyway, yeah, fascinating article. If anyone knows if there is a a video of that. I'd be fascinated to watch it myself. Like I say, if you do know of one, leave it down in the link below where we can find it. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, as always. And of course, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, we'll see you all next time.